Good morning, church. If you have your bulletins with you, if you'll turn to the back page, you'll find the outline there. A few weeks ago, we had VBS, and the last day of VBS was a really wonderful day. We invited friends and family to join us, celebrated all that the kids learned. Well, something unexpected happened to most of us when we went out those back doors. There was a huge tortoise. I mean, it was the biggest thing. I don't know how old it was. But it was walking, and so most people sort of focused on that tortoise, and they didn't see the snake wrapped around the lady's hand right here. So they were demonstrating these critters. And very soon it became obvious who hates snakes. Can you imagine living down that road? Nuclear plant or fire or spider farm, or add whatever your paranoia is. If it's snakes, put snakes up there. What could go wrong in a road like that? When we are born into this world, we are guaranteed things are going to go wrong. We guaranteed stress, we guaranteed trials, we guaranteed depression. All these things are going to come to us, and we won't escape that. One day, Jesus was walking from Jerusalem through the Kidron Valley, and in front of him was the Mount of Olives. And in the Mount of Olives, there was a garden. And it was a garden of olives right in there. And it was a beautiful place, and Gethsemane was what this garden's name was, and Gethsemane literally means oil press. And so it's these olives that you would put in this big round stone made of balsamic stone. It's a very strong stone, and there would be this big old wheel that would be going around there. And these olives would get crushed. Now, when we think about an olive, we think about the olive branch, and we think about peace. We think about oil coming out of the olive, and we realize that when we pray, God says we can anoint with oil. And so oil goes along with prayers, and prayers goes up to God. And oil is also symbolic in the Bible of the Holy Spirit. And so when you put this all together, peace and the Holy Spirit and the symbolisms around it and being pressed, you come to the understanding that Jesus was talking about his very soul being pressed in the Garden of Gethsemane. This might have been worse even than what was going to happen the next few hours. It might even have been worse than his death on the cross. And so what I want you to do today is take everything that you've been experiencing recently. Take all the stress that you have experienced. Think just about this past week, what we had on Monday with Matthew's surgery, Matthew Reynolds, as he went in for spine surgery. Think about what we had with Darrell Denham in hospital with an infectious disease in his hand, and all that surrounds the family with that. Every single day there was something major that was happening. Just a few moments ago, Clara Downard was struggling with pain. She's going to have a spinal block tomorrow afternoon. And so bad was the pain that she couldn't stay. She couldn't stay seated. We've all got things going on in our lives, some a lot more extreme than others. Dalisa's brother and the diagnosis that Osvaldo has right now is heartbreaking. And so when we come to this world and we start walking in this world and we think, everything is going to be great, we pretty soon find out, no, it's not. So what Jesus can do for us today as we take this month of August to transition from anxiety and depression and stress to trust in God, what he can do for us if we would allow him today is he can medicate our stress, our anxiety. He can heal it. He can deal with it. But you have to bring it out. You have to think about it. Bring it in front of him. And the way we do it is we see the stress as internal, external, and infernal. It is internal because a lot of it, as we read these verses behind me, you will see there's stress coming from the inside of Jesus. It's external because as we realize, we'll see that the body of Jesus, the weak body of Jesus, being fully fleshed, fully human, and also fully divine, but the fully flesh part of him is actually producing blood drops, sweat drops like great big drops of blood. And it's infernal because there's very definitely a spiritual battle going on here. And so if you would, look with me at Mark chapter 14. By the way, if you want to get the full idea of this, you can also look at Matthew 26, verse 36 through 56. You can look at Luke 22, verses 40 through 53, and John chapter 18, verses 1 through 11. All the Gospels will talk about the Garden of Gethsemane. They all have different ideas. John will have Jesus walking through the Kidron Valley and seeing how the soldiers come and how Judas betrays him and how they just jump back out of fear when they see Jesus saying, I'm not coming to you by night, I come to you by day, but yet they come at night. So every one of them will have a little bit different. But for now, let's look at the one in Mark chapter 14, verse 32. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. So yeah, you are minding your own business, life is treating you okay, and you get a phone call and you realize your life is being pressed. You are in the oil press. You are in Gethsemane. You cannot walk with Christ after the death on the cross if you don't go through Gethsemane. You can't be a Christian dying with Jesus, being buried with Jesus, resurrecting with Jesus, and walking that post-cross walk if you haven't given up what needs to be given up in Gethsemane. It needs to have stress. It will become supplication, and then it will end up with sifting, and He's going to sift you. And if you will let Him, He will sift you even this morning. And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and He said to His disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And so then He goes further with Peter, James, and John, and He starts to tell Peter, James, and John what's going on in his life. And he is so distraught by what they hear that it affects them. It affects them to where they can't stay awake. They're going to fall asleep. It's a tremendous thing that is happening here. And so it says in verse 32, and He took with Him Peter, James, and John and began to be greatly distressed. This means He was so stressed that He was alarmed. This word can also be translated as surprised. He was greatly surprised because He looked in to what was happening, and with the eyes of the Son of God, He could understand the full depth of what this hour was going to bring to Him. When I say the hour, I mean not only this time in Gethsemane, but the last hour of His life is up until when He leaves this world and He says to the Father, "It is finished." This is the hour that we're talking about, and it will be featured prominently in all four Gospels. So He's alarmed and astonished when He saw what He's going to endure. He was going to endure intense physical pain. He was going to endure the sins of the world on the cross. He was going to endure the judgment of the Father. The unbroken fellowship since the beginning of eternity, imagine that, is now going to be broken. What would that alone leave with Him? He's going to be abandoned by the nations. He was going to be abandoned by His followers and abandoned by His Father. He is going to be tried, rejected, and condemned by the very people He came to save. And the most powerful nation on the face of God's earth is going to turn its full fury onto Him. It's going to unleash its full fury. Can you imagine Jesus at that moment? He's not been in denial. He's always known it would be bad. But He didn't realize just how bad it was going to be. But right here, He's almost alarmed when He sees just how bad. And so it says He greatly distressed and troubled. Troubled means He now has distress and He now has anxiety. And He says to them, "My soul is sorrowful. My soul is surrounded." You know, there's an English word, peripheral. It means to be surrounded on the border around something. And so around Jesus' soul is the sorrow, which means peripheral. Sorrow or peripheral is the same word. He has it all around His soul, encompassing His soul. He says, and He said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, very sad, deeply grieved," in other words, even to death. Do you know that it's possible for you to be grieved to the point where you can actually die? Many people believe that this is the second temptation of Christ. That the devil is actually trying to annihilate Christ here before He gets to the cross, realizing that if Christ dies on the cross, He will be killed. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know right there in Matthew chapter 4, the devil said, bow down to me and I'll give you this. Without the death on the cross, in other words, without doing all these sad things that you, as the man of sorrows, are going to have to bear. Just do this and I'll give it to you. And then in Matthew chapter 6, he says to his disciples, this is how you ought to pray. Lead us not into temptation, remember that? But deliver us from evil. And then in Matthew chapter 16, about verse 21, what does he say to Peter? Peter saying, you don't have to go to the cross, Lord. You know, that's ignoble for you, in other words. And what does Jesus say to Peter? Get thee behind me, Satan. You see, Satan has been trying to prevent this from happening, and he's trying to kill Jesus through grief right here in the garden. Have you ever had that level of anxiety, that level of grief, where you wanted to cease to exist? Can you at all relate to this? I don't think anybody, I know, no one has ever had this level of distress in their lives. But the apostles, Peter, James, and John specifically, are seeing this happen in the Master's life. And so he says to them, remain here and watch. Remain here and watch. So there's this internal pressure. As I mentioned, there's the external pressure. Luke, who's also a physician, a doctor, in Luke 22, verse 44, says this about Jesus. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like, listen to this, great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Yet, we see he survives this to die on the cross. It's also infernal because the pressure is coming from the devil also. There's a satanic battle going on here. In verse 43, it talks, in Luke 22, verse 43, it talks about an angel coming to minister to Jesus. He needs an angelic being. But if you look at Luke 22, go on from verse 43 to verse 53, you'll see something very interesting. You'll see that it talks again about the hour, and it says this. When I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me. Right after this prayer, Judas comes, kisses Jesus, and Jesus is handed over, and he's saying this to the guards who are trying to capture him. Yet you did not try to seize me, but this is your hour. There it is, prominently featured. This is a nominative noun. The first two are both nominative nouns. All three words you have an article that you might not see in the English. But it's talking about what is happening. It's the hour and the power of the darkness. This is what Jesus is battling. This is what it's going to encompass. There is a spiritual battle going on in our lives, and sometimes we don't realize that. We think we can just go about life as if it's going to be okay. But the stress that you feel in this life, the sadness that you feel, the depression that you feel is all coming at you internally, externally, and infernally to get you to trip up. So how do you stay the course during that time? During my military days, when I got to boot camp, I was given a little piece of parachute cord, about that big. But it was wrapped up and down, up and down, up and down several times, and then it was rolled real tightly all the way down and looped. And we carried that rope, and I thought, what is that meant for? Until I got into a war zone, and every single night for hundreds of days, I slept under the African sky. The animals wanted to kill me. The people, the enemy, definitely wanted to kill me. But they never killed me because of a very basic principle. We would tie this cord where, first of all, we'd come back in our tracks, and we would make sure the wind was where animals couldn't smell us and the enemy couldn't smell us. When you've been in the bush for a couple of weeks, you start to smell upwind. And so we had to be really careful about this. And we would set about 150 to 250 yards off our tracks. We'd come back in a horseshoe, and we'd lay an ambush and be spread out. And it would be very, very quiet, but then we would tie that rope to ourselves. I'd have one rope on this end and another rope on that end, and it was kind of loose enough to where you could sleep. But somewhere in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, depending on where you were sleeping, the rope would start pulling on you, and that meant it's your hour to stand watch. And then you would get up, you put your hat on, get your weapon ready, and you would lay and you would listen. and you would wait. And when your hour is up, you would pull the next one. And that happened unless there was a very, very urgent tugging over here. And then you would start very urgently tugging this side, and everybody would be awake. And not a word would have been uttered. Not a word, hardly a sound would escape. But you never, ever, ever found a single night that somebody fell asleep on watch. Never happened. It was absolutely too dangerous. Listen to this, 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. When it comes to this first point of starting off with stress, you've got to be alert and you've got to go through the emotions. You've got to try to verbalize what is actually going on in your life. And the only way you're going to verbalize it if you're talking to someone. And so Jesus starts to talk to his friends, to Peter, James, and John, his closest friends, and he tells them this is what's going on. And then he turns to supplication. Now he's going to refine it even more by going to the Father. So now you take your prayer. So in Philippians chapter 4, it says, be anxious for nothing. But through prayer and supplication, let your request be made known unto God. And so you first of all deal with this anxiety, realize what it is. And then with prayer and supplication, together with thanksgiving, you take it to God. And He'll guard your mind and your heart, your thoughts and your feelings in Christ Jesus. So this is what we have in point number 2. It leads to supplication. And when we look at supplication, we'll see there is a direction. We'll see again the devil is there. But finally, we'll see there's discipline. And folks, this is how your prayer needs to go if you want Jesus to help you through the worst times of your life, which could be in 1 hour from now. It could be a few minutes from now. It could be before this week is over. We don't know. But you could experience the worst moment of your entire life. And this is what you need to do. Immediately start talking to your closest friends. And then go to the Lord with this type of a prayer. Listen first of all to the direction. And going a little further, he fell down to the ground and prayed, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, so this is what he's thinking. He wants this hour to pass. Is that a good godly thought that he's having? You see, he's got to go through this hour. If Jesus didn't go through this hour, you and I would still be in hell for all eternity. We would not be in the kingdom. He had to go through this hour. But what he wants is not in line with God's will at this point, but he's verbalizing it. He says, Lord, take this hour away from me. And he's thinking about it. And then he directs his prayer, knowing what he's going to pray, and he says, Abba, Father. He's directing the prayer to who? Abba, my dad. The person that I'm the closest to, my heavenly Father, in other words. Abba Pater. Abba, Father. It shows the direction. All things are possible for you. Is that true? Is that putting God in a difficult position? All things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. He's straight out saying, I want to go against your will. So that's the direction. The initial direction is towards the Father, but then you hear the words of the devil when he says, remove this cup from me. You know, when things are really, really tough, you will start wanting things that you'll never have, never be able to have. Lord, if you'll only bring my sister back from the dead, if you'll only give me my child back, if you'll only bring one of my parents back, or Lord, why did this happen to someone so young? Why did my brother have to die in Vietnam, or whatever it is that you're really struggling with? The one thing you will never get an answer to is where you're going to start. And you've got to get through that. Get through, take the direction to the Father, understand that the devil is going to be there, but end with discipline. Now listen to the discipline here. Yet not what I will, but what you will. Yet not what I will, but what you will. And so he's coming full circle now. And if you're going to have solution to your problems, look at the Son of God when he was as depressed, as anxious as what you and I could ever be. Other versions of the gospel say that he cried out in anguish. They heard him scream in anguish. This is sort of what it may sound like. Somebody might come to you and say, I need help. I've been in a dark place for a while now, and I pray every night not to wake up tomorrow. I don't know. So much going on through my head, and I try always to justify it and make it my fault. But that doesn't seem to be working. I feel I'm not meant for this world. I would never take my own life, but I just hate the way I feel, and I've been masking it with, and use your choice of drug here, heroin, marijuana, alcohol, whatever it is. This is real. This is real, and this is raw. This is what it feels like when you're filled with grief, when you're filled with anxiety, when you're filled with hopelessness, when you're crying continually. But the truth is, God formed us, and He placed us in a garden. And in that garden, once God had formed us, sin deformed us. And what we try to do through this year, and starting in this month from anxiety to trust, we're trying to be transformed. And it's not an easy path. But you need to let your stress be visible. And once your stress is visible, you need to take it to God in supplication. And then thirdly, you need to let God sift you. And this is probably the hardest part of the text. Because I look at those disciples being sifted. And they fail, and they fail. 3 times they fail. And I see the Son of God. I see Him being sifted. And I see that He comes back better than when He left. If you look at Matthew chapter 26, just to give you an idea of how the Son was sifted, Matthew 26 gives you the 3 stages of the prayer that the other Gospels don't. So you look at Matthew 26, verse 39, verse 42, and verse 44. You see, in the first prayer, He prays, Father, if it is your will, take this away from me. But then in the second prayer, He says, unless it is not your will, unless it is your will for me to die, then don't take it away. And then the third time, it doesn't say what he says. It's kind of quiet. It just says He said the same thing. And so I see Jesus being sifted. And I see how His prayer changes. He goes and He prays for an hour. He comes back and He's sleeping. He goes and He prays for an hour. He comes back, He's sleeping. He goes and He prays for an hour and He comes back, He's sleeping. Maybe it was more than an hour. But it was from the time when they went into that mountain till when the soldiers came in the early hours of the morning, just before the sun was probably breaking, to arrest Him. Trying to catch Him by surprise. Would have probably been just before dawn or as dawn started, is when, if they were good soldiers, they would have tried to have arrested Him. And so here it ends with sifting. Listen how the disciples fail in Mark chapter 14, verse 37. You'll see that there's listening, you'll hear there's learning, and you'll see that there's leaning. And this is all we can do when we are in a real tough time. And He came and He found them sleeping. And He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Now think back. In the prayer in Matthew chapter 6, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Jesus said this is a constant part of your prayer. You need to, every single moment of your life, when you're praying to God, pray that prayer. Listen to what He's saying. And now learn. Learn from this real spiritual battle taking place here in verse 38. Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. If you don't watch and you don't pray, you will enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing. Was Jesus' spirit willing to go to the cross? Yes. What about His flesh? Listen to what the Son of God is saying here. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Listen and learn. And while you're learning, understand you're going to have to lean on Jesus because your flesh is weak. Your spirit, which is God living in you, is strong. Lean heavily on that, but understand that the Spirit is going to try to trick you up. If the flesh could have abandoned Jesus, if he could have died from sorrow, he would have. Verse 39, and again he went and prayed, saying the same words, and again he came back and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy, were very heavy, and they did not know how to answer him. Verse 41, and he came the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. What has come? The hour has come. There it is again. The hour has come. The Son of God is to be betrayed into the hands of sinners. Dr. Luke says that the reason that they were sleeping, according to Luke 22, verse 45, is that they were deeply stressed. They were very, very sad. And he, as a physician, analyzed them and said this sadness is what caused them to sleep. They'd never seen the person that they'd relied on, the person that their faith is based on, in such a state. Can you imagine? You and I have faith. We're here because of faith. Can you imagine if we had to actually see the person that we're basing our faith on this distressed? What would it have done to you? I love gardening. There's several things I love about gardening. I love the smell of fresh soil. I love putting the seeds in the ground. I love seeing the seeds pop up out of the ground. I like reaping a good crop. I especially love eating that crop. But you know what I don't love? I don't love weeding. And this is what this is all about. And this is what Jesus is telling us. We need to learn this. When it comes to the Garden of Eden, compared to the Garden of Gethsemane, we see that the Garden of Eden was a place where Adam and Eve had fellowship. But Jesus goes and restores that fellowship that they had broken because Adam sinned in Eden. And here in the Garden of Gethsemane, we see Jesus battles sin. In the Garden of Eden, we see there's the tree of two, or the tale of two trees, the tree of life and the tree of death. In Gethsemane, we find trees of death and stress all around that garden. We also see at the garden what Adam lost, and at Gethsemane, what Jesus is restoring. Very few times do I see a movie that I can recommend. But my All-American is a movie that was produced in 2015. It's rated is PG. You can actually sit down and watch this movie. It's pretty good. You can go on Wikipedia or on Google and you can research the man that this movie is around. His name is Freddie Steinmark. Freddie Steinmark was 5'9". He didn't weigh much. But he had a tremendous heart, and he wanted to play football with everything. He was a 4.0 student, incredible athlete. In 1969, about the time that Vietnam was really getting to full swing, he got a call from the University of Texas to play for the Longhorns, something he never thought would ever happen. His dream was to go to Notre Dame or the University of Colorado because he lived in Colorado. But he was invited to go to this prestigious program. Never before, maybe once before, had they ever had a person come in their first year of college and actually play for the team. Not only did this man play for the team, but he led this team, not as captain, but by the spirit that he had. He led them to victory. They were the national champions in 1969. But in his last year, he developed a really painful feeling here in his left foot. And when I looked on Wikipedia, not to spoil the movie for you, but this is what they were saying, they found out that he had the size of a baseball, a tumor. The next game was the Cotton Bowl against Notre Dame. He really wanted to play this, and he was at that game, but he was at that game minus a leg. They had to amputate it at the hip. He'd found out in that short space that he had a very severe cancer. Nobody knew how he could ever possibly play football. They didn't even know how he could walk with that tumor. Yet he played so well. He had a wonderful girlfriend, his whole future. He was studying, he was getting best grades in college, had a tremendous career ahead of him. But at the age of 21, he died. On June the 6th, 1971. How do you deal with that type of information? Just like that. The one moment, everything's going well. The next moment, you're fighting for your life. And that could be any one of us. When life is that stressful, the only thing you can do is take it to supplication and let God sift you. And I pray that He will find all of us awake and alert till the moment we finally leave the Garden of Gethsemane and enter into the garden of His permanent care. If you're not ready for that, you don't know if you're going to have another moment. You don't know if you're going to have another chance. All you know is you've got now. If there's anything in your life you need to fix, please do it now. If your soul isn't right, please consider making it right with God today. You may say, I'm not equipped. The Lord is saying, come just as you are. If you need to be baptized, if you need to be restored to the church, if you just need the prayers of this church because of what's going on in your life, whatever your need is, please come forward right now as together we stand and sing.